Right now, it is time for a conversation with Shayne Stanfield, a little sipping on scripture. Good morning to you, Shayne.
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Ron. Thanks for having me. It's that music again. I know it's time.
Put that pinky finger out on the left hand and take a sip.
Yeah. Sipping on scripture for Monday of the 10th week in Ordinary Time, the raven. We see something particularly strange, if not shocking, in today's first reading, which comes to us from the first 6 verses of the 17th chapter of Kings. And it's a key part of the opening act of Elijah's public ministry in a time of covenant crisis. But let's first recall what brought this about. Here we have Elijah confronting King Ahab because he had been leading the northern kingdom of Israel in profound infidelity towards God with the worship of Baal under the influence of his wife Jezebel. So Elijah declares that there will be no dew or rain except by his word, and in the terms of salvation history, this was not just a weather forecast, it was a divine judgment being pronounced for this infidelity by Israel with such idolatrous behavior. And yet this is yet another instance of a prophet making clear to the people of Israel that God alone governs the past, present, and future of all creation, and that obedience to God brings about blessings, while disobedience brings about downfall and loss. The drought in this case therefore functioned as a sign that Israel's relationship with God had been broken, and it would soon be made clear that Elijah was one through whom God was working to show Israel that God alone reigned supreme. Not unlike the reaction to all the other prophets, Elijah would now be seen as a threat to Ahab. So we then read that God told Elijah to go east and hide in the Wadi Cheresh east of the Jordan. God then told Elijah, "You shall drink of the stream." And now for the particularly strange or shocking part, God further states, "I have commanded ravens to feed you there." Yep, God chose the raven of all creatures to provide Elijah food, and one can't help but wonder why. Simply because this is a rather disgusting bird that acts much like a vulture by regularly scavenging for food from the rotting flesh of dead animals. And that's not the worst of it. Human corpses exposed to the elements are also food for the raven, and these birds have been a common sight, particularly at mass casualty events where the dead cannot be properly cared for in a timely manner. This behavior, along with their jet black feathers and piercing black eyes and their eerie-sounding croak, all have given the raven quite a negative reputation for many people throughout history as being an ominous sign of doom. So much so that Edgar Allan Poe famously wrote a poem about the raven being a dark symbol of man's torment of unending grief, despair, and depression over the loss of his beloved Lenore, as it repeatedly responds to him, "Nevermore." But it's clear from this reading that God does not see the raven in these human ways, and perhaps the shocking use of the raven is meant to teach us a few things. The use of the raven here is shocking to us because we see that God has chosen such an unlikely and even troubling creature to carry out his care. The shock of this is perhaps the point of the lesson for us. God is free to use what he wills in order to accomplish his purposes, and the significance of the raven lies in what it reveals about God and not the bird itself. The shocking use of the raven also teaches that God's providence is not limited by human expectations, reputations, or ritual assumptions. God can and does provide through means that appear to be unworthy or impossible. I think this highlights God's holiness and that God is entirely outside and beyond the bounds of any human experience and comprehension, not to mention of all created limits. What is being made clear here is that God is not manipulated by human categories, and his actions are governed by his own righteous freedom. At the same time, the raven reveals God's mercy. The same God who began here by judging covenant unfaithfulness goes beyond justice and also provides bread and meat for Elijah in the wilderness, demonstrating intimate and personal love. This combination of holiness and mercy is central to the biblical portrait of God. Baal and the other pagan gods were known to be capricious and manipulative, so it's quite fitting that God would show here that he is just, good, righteous, and merciful. God's use of the raven, therefore, shows us that God can work through the unexpected without compromising holiness, because his holiness is shown in his freedom and mercy. In other words, God is not somehow contaminated and diminished by using an unanticipated messenger. Rather, his use of something that is seemingly unclean or unworthy is to demonstrate to us his sovereign mastery over creation. This shocking use of the raven is therefore not contradiction of God's sanctity, but a revelation of it. A holy God is free to use what he wills, and a merciful God chooses to use that freedom for life. So maybe it's time for us to rethink any negative notions that we might have about the raven. Perhaps even for us today, the raven should become more of a sign of hope in an unsettling world. Our world regularly feels like it's surely in a drought from God because things like rampant anxiety, instability, moral confusion, and fear can make life seem barren of his goodness. But let's not forget the lessons learned here. Our Christian response should not be to assume that everything that seems strange is necessarily bad, nor is it to interpret every unexpected event as meaningless. God may be using precisely what unsettles us to redirect us toward himself. Suffering and disruption can awaken us from superficial living and draw us into a life of deeper meaning that looks toward the eternal reward with increased love and faith. In that sense, the raven is a symbol of hope and a sign of providence during frightening times. God has and will continue to sustain us through means that we would never have considered for ourselves.
Wow. The raven. I mean,
The raven.
I've read that story 100 times, and that part never stuck out to me.
Yeah.
But what a fascinating point, and to your point, so appropriate to our times too, because we've already judged the things that God can use and cannot use, and the things that are going to be done for our good and the things that are not going to be done for our good, right?
Yeah.
We say, oh, that's not good. Well, no, the Lord said, I'm using it. You may not count it as good. I might not even count it as good, but I can use it for your good.
Yeah, and I think that was a mastery behind Poe's work there.
Yeah.
He used this. I mean, for as long as man has been intimidated by things, and of course, I don't want to get into superstition, but man tends to be that way. They see this raven as just this ominous sign of doom. The
Right.
harbinger of death, because the bird is hanging around dead things all the time.
Yeah.
And think back in antiquity, these battlefields are just littered with bodies that never get buried. So these birds, ravens, vultures, whatever, they're feeding off of the bodies just as much as regular animals, and that sticks with people. So Poe uses this dark imagery, to this guy who's suffering, and really he's just narrating his grief. But every time he says something, the bird calls back, "Nevermore,"
Yeah.
and it drives him into madness, and that just added, to the lore of the raven in this case. But again, I mean, replace raven with vulture, and it would be just as disgusting, as much of a
Right.
turnoff, that you see what vultures do on a regular basis. They don't discriminate.
When you see the circling, you know it ain't good.
Yeah. So that's that's a great point, Ron. You see the circling, and that's telling you something. It's there's death over there. There's death that's arriving some way or somehow. So, but yeah, I think we just need to we need to get out of what we see. And Dave, to your point, what we see on a regular basis, we got these preconceived notions, that we're that we're not going to do it this way, or God's got to do it that way, and God just says no. This is, I'm going to do this for a reason, and maybe it's to teach us a lesson.
Yeah,
What a
in
lesson.
the beginning of the story too, just the fact that the drought all began with an immoral act.
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's not like God isn't watching.
Yes, no, for sure.
Another great sipping on scripture from Shayne Stanfield.
Well, thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
That's going to make me think all day. And watch the skies, right?
That's right.
It is now safe to put your left pinky finger back on the cup.
Yes.
And gulp. You don't have to sip now.
That's right.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Have a
Bye-bye.
good day.
You too.